So like me, C.J. Gardner-Johnson is out of work again. The difference between me and C.J. Gardner-Johnson is that I haven't gotten a second job over the last couple of weeks in a practice squad kind of role, only to be the framing of this. I do have to be fair to the way that it was framed by Adam Schefter of ESPN. I do have to read the story because it does feel like the Ravens just kicked him to the curb. Adam Schefter posted this yesterday afternoon. Ravens are releasing safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson after the safety's agent Kevin Connor and the Ravens officials came to an, quote, amicable mutual decision, per Connor. No one wants to say fired. No one wants to say cut. Everyone wants to say parted ways. Everyone wants to glad handle what went down, where C.J. Gardner-Johnson has been fired for the second time in a month. Said Kevin Connor, Ravens agent, Schefter, his mouthpiece here, quote, after the Ravens traded for a safety, we were looking for a clearer path to play. The Ravens traded for safety Alohi Gilman. I've never heard of this guy before. What are the odds, especially based off of that story that we saw about C.J. Gardner-Johnson talking shit about his teammates behind the scenes, talking shit about contracts behind the scenes? What are the odds that C.J. Gardner-Johnson either, one, talked shit about Gilman after they traded for him, or two, talk shit about a variety of players on the Ravens defense who aren't playing well? I wouldn't even blame him if he talked shit about Marlon Humphrey, who's hosting a podcast talking about the Ravens' struggles. Got to build that brand. Got to put out a podcast where you're not saying really much, if anything, but are somehow getting paid all sorts of fucking money to say absolutely nothing and not really entertain anybody. People will buy entirely based off of your following numbers instead of like the actual content you put out there. Paul, you sound really bitter and jealous. Yes, I am. Athlete podcasts are generally boring as shit unless you can pull some clip out of the podcast and throw it online for aggregation. That's why Micah Parsons is so good at it. He's talking out of his ass most of the time when he's on the podcast. But hey, a lot of things you can throw out there that are going to get reaction and engagement. Anyway, said Paul as he sipped coffee, room temperature coffee, out of a straw. We know that C.J. Gardner-Johnson talked shit about some of his teammates while with the Texans. There's a chance he talked shit about the safety the Ravens traded for as he was on the practice squad. And I think he was probably talking shit about the Texans while he was on the Ravens. Perhaps even before the Texans played the Ravens. Maybe C.J. Gardner-Johnson was trying to pour intel into Baltimore before that game. This was caught by Sideline Sarah of Houston Texans Twitter. This is John Harbaugh talking about C.J. Gardner-Johnson. She gives a timeline here. Texans cut C.J. Gardner-Johnson on September 23rd. Texans-Ravens is October 5th. October 7th, the Ravens signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson to the practice squad. October 8th, John Harbaugh said, quote, we've been talking to him for a little while. October 14th, dumped him a week later. Sideline Sarah theorizes the Ravens used C.J. Gardner-Johnson to rat on the Texans. I mean, that probably sounds right. But C.J. Gardner-Johnson might have viewed it as a therapy session. Here he is, John Harbaugh, talking about the C.J. Gardner-Johnson courting.
Gardner-Johnson, what do you like about what he did?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up too. I've always liked the way he played. He's he brings it. He's a bring it attitude guy. He's a physical player, a lot of juice, a lot of energy. A veteran guy, knows how to play the game. So that's another one that was kind of parallel kind of conversation, really. Maybe him first we were talking about, probably been talking to him for a little while. So having him here is exciting as well. So, yeah, I think our team is better because of that.
Mentioned he'd been talking for a little bit. So, yeah, he was talking to C.J. Gardner-Johnson in between him getting cut by the Texans and signing him because the Ravens played the Texans in between that. But as correctly pointed out on X by Not Santa, you can watch the Gallant Says podcast, at Gallant Says pod. Don't you have to learn the defense before you can give intel? That was a good joke. I do like that kind of thing. There was an interesting theory on Houston Texans Reddit. Let's take a look here. I don't agree with this one, but we'll throw it out there. At Texadia on Texans Reddit said, CDGJ, no, we're not doing that. CDGJ is the defensive version of Deontay Johnson. No, Deontay Johnson never did shit. Deontay Johnson had to be consoled by teammates after the Texans beat the Chargers in the playoffs. He had to be consoled by teammates after a playoff victory. How many teams has he been on in the past year? Is it 4? Is it more than 4? Deontay Johnson used to help the occasionally fantasy football owner out 3 to 4 years ago. What a great third wide receiver to have on your team. Never won a Super Bowl. Gardner-Johnson had 6 interceptions on a Super Bowl winning team. Now, perhaps he needs to keep his thoughts to himself. Perhaps he's a little too unhinged out there. Very difficult to work with. A bit of an ego considering what he actually is. But a thought, let's pump the brakes. Even comparing an unemployed safety like C.J. Gardner-Johnson to Deontay Johnson, who I have practically zero respect for. How do you need to be consoled after a fucking playoff win? How does that happen? I remember seeing that story, and I was shocked that it wasn't a bigger deal locally.